We're excited you're with us today at the Ransom Church. Before we jump in, just a couple of things. First off, we are literally weeks away now from launching West Campus, which is, super exciting. I can't tell you how many weeks. Hopefully in the next week or two, I'll be able to give you an exact date when we're launching. That's just how construction works. But in the meantime, if you've been sitting on the fence, maybe we'll go, maybe we won't. I just want you to know it's not too late. If that's something you've been thinking about doing, you can still go. You can talk to, write it in. I think there's even a box in your weekly handout this week. You can check and say, I'm interested in West Campus. We'll get in touch. I am encouraging people, if you're going to West Campus, don't make a lateral move. And what I mean by that is if you're attending but not serving, go over there and get involved. Serve somewhere. Jump onto the team. If you're serving at the campus you're at now, maybe think about leading or taking that to the next level, whatever that might look like, and just really give yourself over to that process. And if you haven't driven by, make sure to do that. It's really cool. It's really coming together. So that's that. And then also, last week, we had a date night challenge, and hundreds of you took us up on that. We got some pictures here to share with you. People who sent in their date night pictures, and we want to see yours. We want you to put them on Facebook with a couple of hashtags. Clearly, I have to teach you people how to use hashtags because, let's face it, it's pretty rough out there, folks. So, in order to hashtag something, when you post a picture on social media and it says, do you want to make a comment on this? You put the phrase you want, and it's got to be exact. And so it's hashtag, or for those of you who are older, number sign. What you need to hashtag is both hashtag date night and hashtag Ransom Church. And you notice there are no spaces there. You got to do it just like that. If you do date, space, night, Ransom, space, church, we're not going to see it. So if you did it that way, and I'm not pointing fingers, you can go in and edit it and fix that, and then we'll be able to see it. And we just want to share and hold you accountable to those dates. Take your spouse on a date. Have a lot of fun with that. It'll be great. And my date was great, by the way. So we're in week 3 of the fuzzy math of marriage, and we're looking at this idea that marriage just doesn't play by the rules. Math always plays by the rules. We want marriage to work like math. It just simply doesn't. And so we're trying to make sense of this complex equation that we call marriage, and for fun, we're using actual math properties as the framework. So today's property is the distributive property. The distributive property. And this rule of mathematics says the following. You have to distribute value equally to every value in the parentheses. And so if they put an equation up here on the screen, you'll see A is outside the parentheses, B plus C is inside the parentheses, and so you have to distribute the A to both the B and the C, so you end up with AB plus AC. It's the distributive property. That's how that works, and it always works that way. Your marriage, however, does not work that way. Last week, we talked about the order of priority in marriage. Today, we're going to talk about how to make your marriage a priority. Because the reality is, when you put anything else in the parentheses, when you try to make it your spouse plus anything, your marriage is already on shaky foundation. Does anybody who's married, do you remember your wedding vows? I mean, I've been married over 17 years now. I love Stephanie now more than the day that I married her. My love for her has grown through the seasons, but if I'm being honest, I don't remember our vows at all. And that's really terrible because those were the promises that I made representing my love. It's a covenant we made before God, joining us into one. And Ephesians 5:31 tells us, as the scriptures say, a man leaves his father and mother and is joined, is united, is covenanted to his wife, and the two are united into one. They literally become one. It's not about you anymore. Everything in life is about both of you, to become one of you. That's God's design for marriage. Unfortunately, far too often, we lose that focus. Here's some current trends in marriage in the United States. Divorce in the U.S. has nearly doubled since 1960. Financially, divorce costs about $33.3 billion a year. And emotionally, you just can't even measure the cost. And yet Americans, even though divorce has ramped up quite a bit, Americans still seem to like marriage. 67% of Americans, when surveyed, said that they disagree with the idea that marriage is an outdated institution, according to the Austin Institute. 2013, they did a Gallup poll where they found that 75% of Americans are either married or they want to be married. It's a desire that they have, okay? So apparently, marriage isn't completely outdated, and yet not everyone is choosing marriage. If you go back to week 1, Pastor Phil Wiseman talked about how more and more people are kind of taking a test drive. They're living together before they get married. In fact, 44% of Americans think that living together before you get married is a good idea, even though all the evidence shows that that's not the case. And we'll get into that a little bit more later in the sermon. And yet, as we share statistics and research on this, somehow people still end up in a place where the church is the bad guy and we're judging you, we're condemning you. No, we're not. We're going to lay out information here, and you get to decide what you want to do with it, okay? So we're going to try to share the dangers of living together, because ultimately it's just not God's plan. He never intended for marriage to come together, fall apart, come together, fall apart. There was never meant to be a test drive. He drew up a blueprint for marriage, and it was for a lifelong union. In Ecclesiastes 9, verse 9, we read this. Solomon writes, "Relish life with the spouse you love each and every day of your precarious life." That's what God's goal is, that you would relish it, that you would live in that marriage. But a lot of marriages fall apart, and that's not God's plan. It's not the couple's plan either, I don't think. I don't think people are getting in going, let's get married and then get divorced in 3 years. I don't think people are thinking that way. I don't think they're going, I don't think young girls are dreaming of what wedding dresses they will have, or of meeting the one and then meeting the other one. And yet, sadly, that's kind of where our culture is. In marriage, this isn't new. I mean, marriage was a hot topic when Jesus was here too. So let's look at Scripture. Let's turn to Matthew 19. If you're using our Bibles, we'll be on page 590. And if you didn't bring one, you can raise your hand. The ushers are coming around, and they'll make sure you get one. You can follow along. I want to give you a snapshot of God's plan for marriage, the properties for a marriage that lasts. To set the stage, though, I want to look at a confrontation that's happening between Jesus and a group of religious leaders called the Pharisees about the issue of marriage. It was a hot-button issue. So Matthew 19, page 590 in our Bible, starting with verse 1. It says, "When Jesus had finished saying these things, he left Galilee, went down to the region of Judea, east of the Jordan River, and large crowds followed him there, and he healed their sick. Some Pharisees, some religious leaders came and tried to trap him with this question: should a man be allowed to divorce his wife for just any reason? That was critical, okay? For any reason. Literally for any and every reason. Matthew is writing to a primarily Jewish audience, and this Jewish audience was divided between two schools of thought over the interpretation of Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1, which was a key passage on marriage. And so they were arguing over this scripture, and here's what Deuteronomy 24:1 says. It says, "Suppose a man marries a woman, but she does not please him. Having discovered something wrong with her, he writes a document of divorce, hands it to her, and sends her away from his house." So there were two main schools of thought. The school of Shammai, which was very, all truth and no grace, and the school of Hillel, which was taken too far, was all grace and no truth. That was kind of the tension that was going on. It's a little bit like the LeBron-Jordan debate today, which we won't get into. There's no debate. It's Jordan. But I'm just saying, LeBron wants to be Jordan, not the other way around. Anyway, we're done with that. We're going to move on with Scripture. Okay. So a more literal translation here is not if something is wrong with her. It's more if your wife does something indecent. And the question is, what does that mean? The school of Shammai would say that this referred to marital unfaithfulness. Hillel focused more on the if she does not please him part, and they started abusing kind of the grace and the license to do whatever. And so they would allow a man to divorce his wife for anything. Like if she burned supper while cooking it and it did not please him, he could, divorce it. And so they were trying to trap Jesus there, because if he said, no, absolutely, he can go ahead and just divorce her for any reason, he's incriminating himself by making the law of Deuteronomy 24 seem weak. But if he says, no, it's just for this, he's going to lose popular support because many people were actually disobeying this command. Jesus doesn't really do either. He kind of comes down in the middle. He says in Matthew 19, picking up verse 4, "Haven't you read the scriptures?" Jesus replied. "They record that from the beginning, God made them male and female. And he said, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Since they are no longer two but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. What Jesus is doing here is actually pointing back to two scriptures in Genesis. Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, both of which state that marriage, mankind is made for sex, for relationship, but that union is meant to be expressed exclusively within the confines of a biblical marriage. So what he does is he doesn't really agree with either of them. He just says, you guys are missing the point. Marriage is deeper than a human convenience. It's bigger than a social convention. It's God joining two into one. Said differently, you're looking at marriage wrong. Marriage is meant to be a covenant, made not just with your spouse, but as we talked about last week, between you, your spouse, and God. As you move towards him, you move towards each other. But that's how it's supposed to be. And so it's really, really important, the covenantal language, because it really glues this thing together. And this passage in Matthew really focuses on this idea of being joined, the two of them being joined. In fact, it says joined twice. But what's interesting is it's two different words. First of all, it says we leave or separate from our families and we are joined to our spouse in marriage. And it's the Greek word kaleo, which means to glue, cement, or fasten together. To glue, cement, or fasten together. So we are to be actively, as we choose each other, doing everything we can to glue, cement, or fasten this relationship together. The second form of the word is at the end of verse 6, and it says, let no one split what God has joined together, and it's a completely different word, and that word means to fasten or yoke together or to unite. So what you have is a picture of the two in the marriage doing everything they can to glue themselves together from the inside, while from the outside, God is doing everything he can to yoke them together. And so you've got both man and God working together to make sure that marriage stays together. This is why I asked you, do you remember your vows? Because vows are so key. The definition of a vow is a solemn or earnest pledge or promise binding a person to behave a certain way. It's an amazing picture of loyalty and commitment as two people choose to vow their lives to each other. In other words, marriage is not about convenience, it's about commitment. So if you're asking, what gives me the right to divorce my spouse? Is it this or this? You're asking a convenience question to a commitment situation. And the reason that this is breaking down in our society and eroding is because commitment's being redefined. You're just committed as long as you feel like it, except that true commitment goes way beyond feelings. It doesn't distribute itself out to others. It stays committed through all things. I mean, things change, right? People get old. Your spouse is getting old. You know, I don't care if you've been married a year. Your spouse is older than they were, right? Bodies fall apart. Gravity takes over, becomes the enemy, you know? You like it when it keeps you on your planet. You don't like it later, you know? I love Agatha Christie, the novelist. She put it this way. She said, an archaeologist would be the best husband for any woman because the older she gets, the more interested he would be in her. You know? But that's not always how it works in life. And if it's all about emotions, promises can be broken when you don't feel like it anymore. But we're talking about a covenant that is meant to be binding. The best way to prepare for your marriage or for your future marriage is remember what the covenant is all about. If you got married, you made a covenant that went something like this. I take you to be my spouse, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, forsaking all others, I will love and cherish you. Listen, till death do us part. According to God's holy law, I pledge you my faith and love. Wow. You notice it doesn't say, until I don't feel like it anymore. It says until death alone parts us. So what does it look like to live with that? We're going to look at the covenant, and we're going to learn, what can we learn about what a covenant looks like from the marriage vows? First thing we learn is that covenants are unwavering. They are unwavering. This is why we say for better or worse, and for richer or for poor. In any situation, they're meant to be this unwavering thing. Psychology Today wrote an article on the merits of marriage. Here's what they wrote. They said a key to lasting marriage was a belief in the marriage as a long-term commitment and as a sacred institution. Many of our respondents thought that the present generation takes the vow till death do us part too lightly and is unwilling to work through difficult times. Successful couples viewed marriage as a task that sometimes demanded that you grit your teeth and plunge ahead in spite of the difficulties. Do you understand what we just read? That's psychology today. That is a secular psychological journey that's saying if you want your marriage to last, you need to see it as a lifelong commitment and a sacred institution, or it just won't happen. That is profound. Because what they understand is that commitment's not easy. Sometimes you're going to have to grit your teeth. You're going to be miserable in a season. You're going to have to sometimes forego today's happiness for the purpose of securing tomorrow's intimacy. You know, you got to do your spouse and your future spouse a favor and do everything you can to eliminate divorce from your vocabulary. Now, I realize many here have experienced divorce, and I'm sorry for what you've gone through, but you more than anyone know the effects of that divorce, why you would want to avoid it if at all costs, if you can. And so Stephanie and I made an agreement early on in our marriage that no matter how bad it got, and it's been bad at times, I'm not going to lie to you, but no matter how bad it got, that word is off limits. Now, there's no room for abuse, right? There's no room for unfaithfulness, but short of that, things can get bad, but it doesn't have an impact on our covenant because we meant what we said on our wedding day. Death is the only thing we want to end our marriage. The Bible doesn't say marry, but have an exit strategy. There's no passage in Scripture on prenuptial agreements. Right? Every relationship will have crisis. The covenant mindset says, I'm not going anywhere. Problem is, culturally, we tend to be unfaithful at heart. When you cheat, you're forgetting your covenant. When you ignore your spouse or you leave in the middle of an argument, you're forgetting your covenant. When you look at what you shouldn't on the internet, you're forgetting your covenant. When you belittle your spouse in front of other people, you're forgetting your covenant. Marriage is unwavering. It should be for better or worse. Second, covenants are understanding. They're understanding in sickness and in health, right? I mean, you're going to be there through all of it. 1 Peter 3:7 says, in the same way, you husbands must give honor to your wives. Treat your wife with understanding as you live together. She may be weaker than you are, but she's your equal partner in God's gift of new life. Treat her as you should so your prayers will not be hindered. And for me, the key word is, I don't know about you, for me the key word is may. She may be weaker because Stephanie knows weird. But what Peter is saying to us here is, hey, don't be foolish in how you deal with your spouse. One translation is live considerately. In other words, you got to know each other, like know each other. And it goes both ways, husband to wife, wife to husband. But I'm just going to speak as a husband because I am one. Husbands, we have to truly know our wives. We got to know their desires and their goals and their fears and their frustrations and their strengths and their weaknesses and their dreams. And the only way you can gain that is by actually paying attention to her. You can consider her because you paid attention to her, so you actually know her. Here's my thought. God did not create woman for man. God created woman for man to love. And he created us to love one another. That's why in Ephesians 5, he says to husbands, hey, husbands, go all out in your love for your wives, exactly as Christ did for your church. A love marked by giving, not getting. I love this phrase. His words evoke her beauty. Does the way you talk about your wife make her feel more beautiful? Everything he does and says is designed to bring the best out of her, dressing her in dazzling white silk, radiant with holiness. And wives, you've got to treat your husbands the same way. Your spouse is your greatest treasure. You know? Other than your salvation alone, your relationship with God, your spouse is your greatest earthly treasure. And that's not usually how we treat our spouses. Nothing will challenge that like health issues. Anybody had to face health issues in your marriage? You know, one or the other spouse had health issues. I mean, my dad, growing up, my dad had multiple sclerosis for 43 years before he passed away. And my mom never left him. And you know, my parents were far from perfect. Their marriage was far from perfect. But I didn't wake up any day of my life wondering whether she was going to stick with him. Like it was not even a question. And I knew, even as a kid and as a teenager, I knew that was a big deal. And then I got married. And I discovered the true depth of love in that choice. And I've been injured more times than I want to admit in public. But Steph has taken care of me so many times, not the least of which was my climbing accident, and she had to push me in a wheelchair and give me shots and wait on me hand and foot. More recently, she's been recovering from a pretty aggressive knee surgery, and she's on the tail end of that. But I didn't look at that or her as an inconvenience. I saw it as this incredible opportunity to begin to serve her back after all the times that she loved me through my brokenness. Covenant love understands and embraces the mess. You know, an anonymous source put it this way: happy marriages begin when we marry the ones we love, but they blossom when we love the ones we marry. And one of the best ways you can do that is to serve through those situations. The third thing we learn about covenants is that covenants are unselfish. That's why our vows say, forsaking all others, which, by the way, includes yourself. But the fact is, as culturally, we're a selfish society. You know, we live in an age where, whether you're wired this way or not, our age that we're living in is wired for instant gratification. It's me first, it's money first, it's pleasure first, what I want, what I need. Forget everything else. It's about me. I read a story about a man who wrote a letter to the newspaper columnist Dear Abby a few years ago, and he said, "Dear Abby, I'm in love with and having an affair with 2 different women. I can't marry them both. Please tell me what to do, and don't give me any of that morality stuff." And Abby's answer was classic. She said, "Dear sir, the only difference between humans and animals is morality. Write a veterinarian." But I think the selfishness that man represents has invaded marriage in our society. Marriage is, by its very definition, a covenant to put your spouse first, and yet so many in our culture, they're trying to build a marriage on a foundation of selfish thinking. How can you build an unselfish relationship on a foundation of selfishness? You can never honor your spouse selflessly as long as you're choosing to live selfishly. That's why Paul tells us in Philippians 2, when you do things, do not let selfishness or pride be your guide. Instead, be humble and give more honor to others than to yourselves. So let me make the discussion a bit more practical. Married couples, are you committed to selflessness? Marriage is meant to be a holy covenant, one man, one woman for life, 2 becoming one flesh, and that has practical implications. For instance, are your eyes part of your flesh? Then don't look. Are your hands part of your flesh? Then don't touch. Is your heart part of your flesh? Then don't give it away to someone else. You see it? Pursue your spouse and your spouse alone. Don't even give it to an image on a screen. Pursue your spouse and your spouse alone. The distributive property does not apply here. You are not meant to share intimacy with anyone or anything else. Now, if you're not married, let me ask you the same question. Are you committed to selflessness? If you are not married, raise your hand, raise it high. Everybody look around. The person raising their hand, they're single. See anybody you like? You can hang out in the lobby afterwards. If you meet someone, you're welcome. You don't owe me anything. You're welcome. Now, assuming that those of you who are single, number one, that God's plan is for you to marry. It may not be, but assuming that He's got marriage in your future, and assuming that you one day marry, how many people plan on cheating on your spouse? Breaking their heart? Probably no one, right? Except our culture's wired to do it. Hebrews 13 verse 4 says marriage should be honored by all and the marriage bed kept pure. So who's called to honor the marriage bed? Married people? Unmarried people? I'm married 17 years. My wife's in this service. You think she'd be okay if I sleep with someone else? No. Well, what if I just stay over at their house? There's no sex. I'm just sleeping in the same bed. Is she okay with that? No. Why? Because anything less than total faithfulness is unfaithfulness. So then the question is, well, why is it okay for the unmarried? And the answer, scripturally anyway, is it's not. Marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure. When you're intimate before marriage, you're cheating on your future spouse, even if you don't know them yet. I mean, if you've got a future spouse out there, who do you want them sleeping around with? So they can't, but you can? You see the double standard there? If we're going to live selflessly, if we're going to live honorably for Jesus, we got to give honor to the institution of marriage. And people will say, well, I plan on marrying that person. We're really serious, and I'm getting ready to propose, or we're engaged. And I say, congratulations, but you're not married yet. And much of society is cheating on your future spouse. And I get why more people are doing this than ever before. There's a whole generation of people who grew up and their parents divorced, right? That divorce was skyrocketing. And everybody started going, well, I don't want a divorce, and so I'm going to give this thing a test run. Which sort of makes sense, except that unfortunately it never works out. 33% of Christians live together before they get married. They cohabitate. And statistically, what society shows is that 80% of people who live together before they get married either break up or they get married and divorce. 80%. You have a 4 out of 5 chance of the relationship failing if you cohabitate. You have a 20% chance 1 in 5 women who cohabitate have an affair. 1 in 5. You're twice as likely to divorce long term, and the male is twice as likely to become abusive. I mean, are those the odds you want to go into marriage with? And this is where people go, you're judging me, you're condemning. No. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm not trying to condemn you, judge you. Like, that's not what's happening. We love you. This doesn't work. If you want proof, you can look up the statistics, but all you really have to do is just look around. There are screwed up relationships that are not working everywhere. Relationships are failing left and right. If you've got friends right now and they are struggling in their marriage and they're considering divorce, the odds are incredibly high that they live together first. Because the distributive property doesn't work here either. We're literally, when we do this, we're giving pieces of ourselves out that we can never get back and then never later give to our spouse. Covenants say that there's just not room for that. And then number 4, covenants are unending. Or that's the plan anyway. That's why the vows say, till death do us part. And that used to be understood, and it's still part of most wedding vows, and it's probably part of your wedding vows. The problem is media and culture see it as obsolete. I mentioned earlier, 63% of people say that they still believe in marriage. 70-some say they want to be married, and yet 73% of people under the age of 45 say that they believe that the idea of one person for life is useless and unworkable. Which means if you add these up, everyone wants to get married and expects to get divorced. How crazy is that? I was talking to a friend a couple weeks ago when we did the first week of this, and they said they were going to be a bridesmaid in a wedding, and they were at a wedding store and they were getting a dress, and they actually heard a mom and her daughter. The daughter was trying on wedding dresses, and the daughter came out in this beautiful wedding gown, and the mom said, "Oh, that's a beautiful dress for a first wedding." Like, it's in our brains. And I get it. The reality is, without God, maybe a life commitment is impossible. I don't know. I mean, even the most committed husband and wife, you're going to see someone across the room. You're going to feel attractions. You're going to have fights with your spouse and go and wonder, what if? It takes God's Holy Spirit at the center of a marriage to just yoke it together in a way that it's meant to be. And if you've gone through a divorce, we're so sorry for your hurt, and we're glad that you're here. But man, even if it was like, unfaithfulness or abuse or whatever, even if you needed to get out of that marriage, you still understand on the backside of that something was lost. Billy Graham, before he passed away, they were talking to him about marriage, and they said, "What's your secret to a marriage that's lasted over 50 years?" Here was his answer. He said, "We are happily incompatible." We are happily incompatible. In other words, she's not me. I'm not her. And that's okay. And marriages that last a lifetime learn to appreciate this. Now I'm going to turn it over to the campus pastors to wrap it up, but before we do, let me leave you with one last thought. A good marriage is not a gift which the bride and groom discover among the wedding presents. It's lifelong, built by 2 hearts and 2 pairs of hands, constantly working together over a long period of time.